Welcome to another episode of Euphoric, the podcast. I am so delighted, so honored, so pleased to have the gay and Katie Hendricks here on the show today. I'm such a big fan of your work and your books. How are you doing today?
Fantastic, Karolina. It's been a beautiful day here where we live. I've been to the gym and pumped iron and then
Yes, and I've been down and had coffee with a friend already, so I'm pumped up and ready to go.
Amazing. Well, I love your books. I think we'll talk about so many different topics today, but starting with the basics, The Big Leap is one of those books that I find myself recommending to so many friends and so many clients because I've been there myself. It happens to me still. But getting down to the basics, you talk about this phenomenon called the upper limit in this book. And I'd just love to hear from your own words. What is this phenomenon and how do we hold ourselves back in this way?
yes, well, one of the things that I started noticing early on, and it also applies to relationships too, is that when I first started to notice it, I realized that I had a limited tolerance for things going well for very long. I'd eat a good diet for a few days and then I'd sabotage it, or we'd have a few days of really good flow, and then one of us would pick a fight with the other one. And so I begin to call that the upper limit problem because I noticed that it happens everywhere in the world, that people have some success at work or at home or wherever, or they just feel good inside for a few days, and then inevitably they do something to mess it up. And so I started calling it the upper limit problem because as we went around the world, we saw it everywhere. Doesn't matter if you're in Bombay or Beverly Hills or the Bronx or wherever you are, the same thing happens. And so we started to notice that particularly in relationships and begin to ask a question, well, what if we could identify those upper limit problems? Could we extend the periods of time we're feeling good and feeling in the flow? And so we just started living in that question all the time about, could we expand the amount of time we're living in the flow? And, eventually we got to the point where we just didn't mess up the flow anymore.
Yes, but it definitely took some practice. I was just remembering a classic moment where I thought, okay, this is an upper limit problem. This was back in the day where I got perms for my hair, and I had just come back from getting my hair permed and I was feeling, all woo, I got my hair permed, and so I walked in and Gay starts to hug me.
And then I went, geez.
I said, your hair smells like a rat's nest.
It was this kind of musty smell, and it just freaked out my nose. So that's a classic upper limit.
Yeah.
I go to say, hey, darling, welcome back home. Haven't seen you a couple hours. And all of a sudden,
Yeah.
and so but
Tomato juice, by the way, tomato juice is
and it turned out that the person had used some different formula on her head or something like that. Anyway, it made it smell weird. So, but fortunately, it's never happened again.
right. I made sure that it didn't happen. But one of the things that we notice is that it's not just a personal or even an interpersonal problem. It's really an evolutionary problem that human beings have been really trained for so long to look for where the threat is, where's the next, so people who were attuned to, what bad thing is going to happen next survived. And so actually building a brain and a body that can handle longer periods of things going well is really an evolutionary problem for all of us.
Yeah,
and you can understand why evolution, it was so important to focus on adversity, because if, just a couple of thousand years ago, people were dodging tigers at night to go to sleep and building fires to keep the bears out of the cave for the night and things like that. So you had to be on the lookout for things that were going to be trouble. Now we're in a different stage of evolution where one of our evolutionary tasks is to learn to feel better and to stay in the flow for longer and longer periods of time.
Yeah, well, I can share a personal example. I got a book deal from HarperCollins back in 2020, and it was one of the best things that ever happened in my life. And I tell you, the next week I had one of the worst weeks ever. And, it was just that, like you're saying, like we've either been hurt in the past or it's just that we always fear the other shoe will drop. So all of a sudden that worry or that anxiety or just all these unpleasant emotions come up that disturb it. And I see it happening a lot with the clients and the women I work with, where they remove alcohol from their life and everything gets better. They're able to work out more, have more present relationships. They're able to focus on their goals and dreams. And they're just not used to holding that much space for that much good stuff in their lives, that they're just waiting for something to go wrong or to sabotage even.
Yeah, I started out my career way back working with juvenile delinquents, and many of whom were also drug addicts. And I remember this one guy, this one kid, after he had gone through kicking heroin and had kind of got his life back together, I was asking him, what's different about your life now than it was a year ago when you were still addicted to heroin? He said, well, lots of things are different. He said, but one thing I'm still having trouble with is what to do all day. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, back when I was a drug addict, my day was so busy because I was always looking for a score, getting a score, recovering from it, sleeping in, and it went on this daily thing. And I would imagine it's the same thing in the world of alcoholics too. But finding out how to engage, what to engage in your life. That's why, like in the Big Leap, I talk about something that I think everybody can be engaged with, and that is creating more of their genius and discovering more of what their individual unique contribution is, and then bringing that out to the world. That's, to me, that's the payoff at the end of anything like giving up an addiction, is being able to get that energy back and express it to some place that's going to do good for you and other people.
Yeah,
And also there's a different kind of energy when I am, or you are expressing your genius, something that you love to do, it creates a different kind of nutrient inside that's different than the kind of artificial high that you get either from alcohol or from criticizing, that adrenaline hit. And it's much more sustainable and deeply satisfying. But most people are unfamiliar with feeling that good, on a steady basis. And so there's this adaptation to, wow, can life actually be this much fun, this sweet, and also contactful? Because I think the main thing that happens in an addiction is that we get disconnected from both ourselves, but also for the possibility of the nutrient of connection with others. And, it's really classic, known now with research, that the antidote to addiction is connection and deep connection. And so that is an area where people can begin to open up the yumminess of actually being able to be real and to be in the same space with someone else, rather than being behind the curtain of the addiction.
Yeah. Almost like wearing a mask or a filter or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've definitely seen as well, like I think Stephen Pressfield also makes this good point in The Art of Turning Pro, where, we turn to numbing or blaming or any other maladaptive behavior because we have this creative force inside of us that we're not releasing, that we're not sharing with the world. And I do think it's all of our destinies to be able to step into that. And so when you're working with people or you're meeting people, you guys have long, experiences in this world. How do you help someone even determine what that is if they're not even in touch with what that zone of genius might look like for them or be for them?
A big key to it is to open up the skill of wonder in yourself. Here we revere wonder questions. We ask people to find out the big wonder questions that their life needs to answer, like, what do I most love to do? And what do I do that makes the biggest contribution to the well-being of other people? Those kinds of questions we call wonder questions, because they're questions that you can't get to by thinking in the old ways you've thought. You have to open up a new part of yourself, and wonder can do that to you. Wonder can put you directly in touch with the creative forces in the universe. And so we're big teachers of wonder around here. The other thing you can do is begin to look at look at how fear works in your body, because fear is down underneath the upper limit problems. In other words, things are going well, and then you get scared things couldn't possibly going this well. And then your mind comes up with a good way to make sure you don't feel good anymore. You know, so the unconscious mind is always listening to you. And so, and then that starts the downward cycle. You retract your energy and go into some kind of addiction or maladaptive behavior of some kind. I was born lucky in a way, but because I never had a good, I mean, I never enjoyed alcohol very much. I like a half a beer on a hot day, but that's about it. A couple of swigs of Katie's wine at a dinner I'll have.
A couple of swigs of my glass of wine. Yeah.
But I've managed to get through 79 years here without ever being drunk or inconvenienced in any way by alcohol. But I have a feeling, even though I don't have personal experience in kicking the alcohol habit, that it's sort of like other habits in a way, you know, like I was the first time I really acted out an upper limit in my life. I was obese and I went on a diet and I ate very purely for about 30 days and I lost 35 pounds. And so I was feeling, wow, you know, I recovered all that energy, you know, turning 35 pounds of fat into energy. That's a big deal, you know. And so I was bopping down the street in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I looked to my left and I saw this family of four devouring an ice cream sundae with 3 bananas and all sorts of different flavors of ice cream. I went into a trance and I went in there and I bought an entire one for myself. And I think it was the first time I'd ever went from exhilaration to misery so quickly because I was so exhilarated before. But within 20 minutes of eating that ice cream and everything, especially since I'd been pure for a month, you know, eating fruits and vegetables, that stuff hit me like a freight train in my belly. And I got the worst stomach ache I think I'd ever had in my life. It was like getting punched into my belly. And I remember doubling over on the street in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and some woman passing me said, "Are you okay, sir? Are you okay?" You know, I definitely was not okay. But so that put me on to, am I allergic to feeling good all the time? And that started leading me into looking at the upper limit problem in other people's lives and myself. And boy, it's you know, we've been around the world, what, 30 some times equivalent, doing seminars and that kind of thing now. And I haven't found a culture yet where they don't have some version of the upper limit problem.
Yeah, and some of them are kind of hilarious. Like one of my favorites is from Germany. The bird that sings in the morning, in the evening will be eaten by the cat. So
It's an upper limit
this
joke.
whole, and of course we know in Australia the tall poppy syndrome of, you know, don't be a tall poppy because. But I wanted to return for a moment to your question about how do you uncover your genius. One of the great places to look is in your childhood. What did you love to do? And especially where the time would disappear. I remember finding my baby book, my mother's baby book about me that I didn't find until I was in my 20s. And her very first entry was, Katie loves to pull herself up in her crib and dance. And it was very funny for me to see that because my profession that I moved into is I'm a registered dance movement therapist. I use movement and the language of movement to help people explore their lives and what they want to create. So I think that the seeds of our genius are always there. And it also has to do with what's easy. What I've noticed is that when people are in their genius, they have this sense of, well, isn't this just something that anybody else can do because it's just so easy? But they don't realize it's easy for you because it's your genius. And so opening up to, we have this whole no pain, no gain, you got to work hard and, you know, to get forward. But the expression of genius lets us know that creativity can be easy and can radiate both nourishing you and nourishing the world as you're expressing it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I definitely remember reconnecting with my inner child as I was going through the same journey. And I loved to read when I was younger, and I loved to teach little classes, and I loved to write plays, and I loved to, even psychology back then. And it's so interesting how, life can, thwart you, or you just get hurt along the way, and you kind of stop believing in that bigger creative, power and expression in that. And I'm curious, you mentioned these two examples, like a German, saying, and then like the Australian, when one flower is growing too tall, too beautiful, that you have to cut it down. We understand this phenomenon now that, when things are going too good, we might have some kind of mechanism that sabotages it or can't expand in that feeling goodness. What are those underlying hidden barriers that stop us from that? Like, what is the underlying psychology that we are running that program on that kind of stops us from expanding into that goodness?
Yes, well, it's embedded in some old unconscious beliefs. Another example, if you go to Sweden, one word that you'll learn very quickly is lagom. And that means don't be too much, don't be too little. Just stay right there in the middle. And it's kind of an upper limit concept that's wired into their culture, that everybody has that framework. And a lot of the Swedes we would work with at our trainings would be moving beyond that, but they would always mention that,
Yeah.
going beyond lagom is a scary thing. And so there are only a handful of limiting beliefs that put a crimp on your genius. But one of them, probably the most fundamental one, is that you believe that you're fundamentally flawed in some way that prevents you from really enjoying the good things of life. Like I'm the wrong weight, or I'm the wrong height, or I'm the wrong skin color, or I'm the wrong gender, or whatever it is that we use to limit ourselves. And, there are some real world things there too, but those are hard to change. What you need to do is focus on the things that you can change. So the moment you say, okay, what if I believed that I had a right to enjoy myself and to have a good relationship with a flow of positive energy in it, rather than thinking those things were impossible? So you begin to break out from those old beliefs, like I'm fundamentally flawed and I don't deserve love, or I'm fundamentally flawed and I don't deserve abundance. So that's one of them. That's probably the biggest one. A second one that a lot of people in our area feel is what we call the fear of outshining. That a lot of people feel okay if they're kind of supporting another person being up in the light, but they don't feel comfortable being in the light themselves. And there's nothing wrong with being a support person, but if you're doing that in a way that denies your own ability to be in the spotlight, then it becomes a limiting belief. A lot of people also suffer from a difficult relationship with the past, where they don't allow themselves to grow fully because they feel that people in their past would not approve. And some of those people have been dead for 50 years, but the idea still lives in our minds that, grandma would never approve of me doing a thing like this.
Yeah, it's a kind of a disloyal program. Like, we don't do that here. You can't show up, you're betraying the family. If you show up in some kind of a different way. And all of those beliefs can really take root, not just in our brains, but in the way that we breathe and move and relate to others. And so it creates a kind of a crimp in spontaneity and the ability to be vulnerable, but also to access your creativity. So I always appreciate when people are willing to step into, gee, I wonder what it would be like if I let my creativity lead me, or if I let what I really wanted to do lead me. What's the next action I might take to express my genius a little bit more? And so we assist people to take little steps that allow them to expand and then integrate, instead of expanding and then freaking out and having that big up down cycle.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I come from a family who suffered a lot of atrocities in World War II, and my parents grew up in a post-war communist country. And, in today, 2024, like we have this ease of internet and connectivity and so much education on, entrepreneurship. Like, really, I truly believe anything is possible today. And it can be really mind-boggling when you come from generations or you have other people around you who either didn't have that possibility or had that suffering and those hardships, like, who am I to deserve this? And also, what kind of belonging will I lose if I step out into my zone of genius? So I think those are really, really good points. So you guys have been married or together for over 40 years, I believe,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, we just celebrated our 44th anniversary,
Wow.
44th anniversary of the day we met
Yeah.
in 1980.
Oh my gosh. Katie, can you tell us a little bit about how you two met?
Oh my goodness. Well, we have what I think of as a superb meeting story where Gay came to give a lecture at the graduate school where I was both teaching and getting my doctorate. And he was looking around the circle before the lecture started. And I was just watching him looking at people and studying them and finding that very interesting. And then he went a little bit past me and came back, and we had what I called a infinite moment of recognition.
Mm.
And then he went, and then he finished, and then he opened his mouth and started talking. And I went, oh, this is the funniest, smartest person that I have ever met. And so I was just enthralled and taking notes. And so I went up to ask him a question at the break, and I never did get the question out of my mouth. And I can't remember what the question was because he says, first thing out of his mouth,
I said, I feel very attracted to you, and I'd like to ask you out for a cup of coffee, but I need to tell you something. I just had this big awareness last month of how I mess up every relationship I've ever been in by either not telling the truth or not taking responsibility for something that came up and blaming it on the other person, or somehow compromising my creativity to be in the relationship. And I just realized I no longer want to do that. So I only want to be in relationships where both people are committed absolutely to telling each other the truth. Both people are committed to taking responsibility instead of blaming, and both people are really committed to their creative path. So on those terms, would you like to have a cup of coffee with me?
Oh my gosh. And that's the theory behind conscious loving, right?
Yes.
Is really living according to those themes. And the definition of unconscious loving would be falling into those traps. And so
Yeah.
you've worked probably with a lot of couples, you've heard a lot of stories. Like, can you explain some of the principles more in detail about how we can really grow and expand in our relationships and have that conscious loving relationship?
Yeah, sure. Uh, the basic thing that happens is when you get two people relating to each other, you have more energy than either of you have individually. And that increase in energy, what you do with that determines how the relationship will move. It's really a setup for the upper limit problem because you, whoa. And so really learning, I think there were a couple of really big turning points we decided to create a no blame relationship because we now understand that blame and criticism is the number one relationship killer. And we decided that we were going to just end that, even though we'd both been pickled in criticism. We, grew up in families that were very critical. And so we just decided to commit, which is a basic principle in conscious loving, that you step fully in to a commitment and then you get to discover how to really generate it. And so we committed to ending blame and criticism. And as a help along the way, when we criticized, we would immediately shift into appreciating. What can I appreciate in this moment about you, about me, about the world that would shift us from critical brain over into wonder brain? And we practiced that for a long time before we were able to eliminate it. But I can definitely say there has not been a critical word in our house in this century.
Wow.
Yeah, we worked
Wow. That
on
is
that a while
incredible.
back, especially during the 80s in the first 10 years of our relationship. Because if you've ever been in a relationship, check out what I'm about to say. all relationship arguments are a race to occupy the victim position. That one person says, hey, if you don't quit doing dot, 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 or why do you keep doing dot, 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 and making me feel,
always.
yeah, you always. And so the other person won't stand still for that, of course. So they say, wait a minute, I'm the victim here. You're the one that's been doing it to me. And then that can literally last for 30 years. I mean, we've had couples in here that have been having the same victim-related argument for the entire period of their lives, or their lives together. So there's only one way out of that problem, and that is to take healthy responsibility for you being there. And if both people can get in the habit of doing that, you don't really need to argue anymore, because if one person says, okay, I see why I started a fight with you. I'm tired and I didn't get any alone time today. And so I just took it out on you. Okay, so that's a really useful thing to be aware of then. Or another person might say, oh, remember that moment we were a year or so into our relationship and I started to criticize you about something?
Yes.
And all of a sudden I said, oh, I was starting to criticize you, but now I realize I'm not irritated. I'm scared.
Yeah, boy.
And I'm scared. What am I scared of? And then I realized, oh, I'm scared I'm going to lose you. And that was this huge moment of going from criticizing her to taking responsibility for the feeling itself and why I was criticizing her. I wasn't any longer criticizing her because she was doing something wrong. Suddenly it was, oh, I see why I'm doing this. You know, I'm afraid I'm going to lose you. And so that leads to a whole different dialogue than saying, why did you come home late or something like that?
So you don't substitute blaming the other for blaming yourself. And learning how to genuinely wonder, I wonder how, especially how am I generating this kerfuffle right now? Or what would it look like if I were using my creativity in a different way? Because almost all conflict is a repeated pattern that we've learned. And, you know, something that you saw or something that was just around you, and learning how to genuinely take responsibility actually reclaims your creativity, because you've been using your creativity unconsciously. And when you go, oh, wow, that's how I keep repeating this thing where I criticize you and then I feel bad and then I go off and then I promise to do better. And, you know, you start to recognize the pattern and think, gosh, what would happen if I just used all of that creativity to create connection, or to ask you what you really want, or to spend more time in my own creative genius rather than trying to get my goodies through you? Then things really start to evolve into what I like to call a journey of discovery. Because one of the mythologies about relationship is that, oh God, once you get into a relationship, you got same old, and you got to compromise and you got to settle for less. And to me, that's just a repeating of unconscious patterns. That with you, I'm always discovering something new about you, including the jobs that you've had. You've had more jobs than anybody I know. He'll keep popping up with some other job that he had while he was in school. And finding out more about your partner and yourself then creates variety in your relationship, and creates that kind of newness, so you can have the deepness of connection and the newness of discovery, which makes for a really lifelong expansion and fun together, rather than, okay, you know, how's your other half? Well, we're slogging around and, you know, we're just kind of used to this now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you mentioned the unconscious patterns, especially ones that we're repeating either from our past experience or things that we maybe are modeling from other people we saw growing up. You share so many examples in conscious loving. Like, is there anything coming to mind of an example of someone repeating a behavior that they witnessed in, you know, maybe another relationship as they were growing up that they repeated in their own life?
Oh yeah, like lots. But see, I remember something Carl Jung said about that: if you don't address your unconscious, then you'll go through life and things will keep showing up and it will look like fate rather than something that you can see why you created that. We had a couple once that had come in from a faraway place to work with us for a couple of days. And the presenting problem was that he had really pushed her out because they'd been together about 6 years and everything was going fine. And then she had a one-night stand at a conference she was attending. And then she made the dreadful mistake of telling the truth about it. I'm joking. That's what everybody should do. But she did what 99% of people who have one night stands don't do. She went home and she talked to her husband about it. And he had a major blow up. And basically, they'd been on the outs ever since.
He kept blaming her.
Kept blaming her. So he
Like
was
if you,
stuck.
yeah, he
If
was,
you hadn't done this.
yeah.
And the funny
And-
thing was, even if the Supreme Court had lined up, they would have probably picked him as the victim because she had gone away and had the one night stand and he
Yeah.
didn't do that. And but you got to look a little deeper because my question to him was the whole first day, I kept homing in on why was it inevitable that this particular thing happened, that this particular upper limit thing happened, of all the possibilities, like she could have been in a car wreck or you could have been in a car wreck or something happened, but this particular one happened. Why would that be? And all day long, oh no, it's just her fault and everything. You got to fix her. And
it was really digging
Yeah.
for a while.
but the second day, suddenly it dawned on him. He said, "Oh, I wonder if it had anything to do with that thing with my mom and dad." And we immediately perked up. So what?
Right.
He said, "When I was 1 year old, my mother ran away with a traveling salesman or something and never returned
Just
and
left.
left my dad with 4 kids to raise, including a 1 year old. And my whole childhood was filled with what terrible people women are and how they'll always betray you." And the funny thing was, this guy was a professor at a university, with a doctorate and everything. And it had never occurred to him to kind of look down in there and say, why would this be happening to me? But see, the moment you can get yourself out of the victim position by taking healthy responsibility, not blaming yourself, but something, why would this particular thing have happened? Well, immediately it became clear that he was just acting out a pattern that he had stored up unconsciously his whole life. And then this thing had, quote, come out of nowhere, but it hadn't come out of nowhere. It came out of the rich soil of his unconscious and all the things that he had pushed away all of those years. But the happy news is they got through it and prospered, and they went on to a reasonable, happy ever after place. They didn't break up, in other words. So that's the miracle that happens when people can really claim honest, open-hearted responsibility for things rather than blaming.
Yeah, yeah. And in feeling those things and really diving deep, like it takes some level of emotional intelligence, right? And so how would even someone begin? Like, when you mentioned, I wasn't irritated by you, I actually was feeling fear earlier. Like, what would be some of the first steps of really being super authentic and recognizing what those deeper layers of either emotion or traumas or history might be?
Usually, people are not able to get to that right away because we just don't have that in our culture. We don't have a culture of description of what's going on our insides. And so one thing that has been very helpful is for people to identify their body sensations, which, doesn't sound very profound, but it's real and it's unarguable. And so if somebody says, "Oh, I just noticed that my neck really started hurting," and then they can start wondering about, what is there a message here? Oh, I noticed that my shoulders have been really sore lately. I wonder what's been stored in there. And then we can assist them. Well, this is the area where most people store anger. So are you angry about something that you haven't identified or expressed about yet? So the body sensations can be a roadway to deeper exploration of our insides, and not just emotions, but just the whole journey of of how you perceive the world and how you interpret that and then how you act, then you can begin to open that up to your partner. And being able to discover how somebody else is experiencing the world, as they're experiencing it, is very juicy. And it creates a kind of intimacy, a vulnerability that most people don't have because they're just communicating, from neck up. And so when people learn how to give attention, for example, to their breath, that can be a very important way to say, oh, I just noticed that I held my breath. Oh, what just happened? When people can make that leap to something happens in their body and what was just happening inside or between them, then they really start to begin to weave together, not just discovery, but the basis of healthy responsibility.
Yeah, yeah. You speak about, sharing, practicing the truth, being very honest with each other, even microscopic truths, right? Of
Yep.
really sharing every feeling and thought. Is it ever go too far? Is there ever a point where it's like, nope, don't share that kind of stuff? Or is that whole truth really the key to intimacy?
Well, most people, when they first get hold of the concept, they probably overuse it, I think there's a point where you can say,
"Chest is aching. What is that? Was that from a past life or
but after a while, it just gets down to be part of, we always say here that get to where you can converse about your emotions in the same tone of voice as you talk about what time of day it is, because it's exactly the same information. If you say, okay, it's 20 minutes till the hour and I feel scared.
Mhm.
It's 20 minutes till the hour and I feel angry. Just getting on that kind of conversant relationship
Mhm.
with, there's really only three big emotions that you need to get good at communicating to solve problems. One is you need to get good at communicating your anger. You need to get good at communicating sadness or sorrow or whatever that chest feeling is that gets a grip on us. Sadness is probably the best word for it. Also, the gut feeling of fear, the clutching gut feeling, the butterfly sensations of fear. Those are three things you really need to learn how to communicate in close relationship, because so many couples get to communicating only at the anger level.
Right.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And they don't get underneath to what is underneath that, the sadness level and the fear level, because fear is underneath most of those other emotions. To the bottom line feeling is, I'm scared of something. And it could be, I'm scared of something, of telling you about something I've done, or I'm scared because there's something about me that I can't bring myself to communicate to about you.
Yeah.
We've had any number of versions of that. But the thing is that all of these things are learnable. And
Totally.
that's what needs to be. It's just like as a child, you go through learning to point and name. You say, okay, that's a chair, or this is my shoulder. It's just learning to point and name at different things that are kind of that society freaks out about, because if you haven't processed your own emotions as an adult, things your children do will trigger you.
Yes.
And the cycle goes on.
Yeah, yeah. And so even if something you think would hurt the other person, like it's kind of open for that, there's that fear element to it. Like maybe like you mentioned in your books, like you're attracted to someone else, and how do you share that with a partner? And so it's more
Just
maybe of a
like that.
fear of losing them if you share, right?
Well, then that could be something else that you share. I'm scared to say this. That might be where you start. I have something to share with you and I feel really scared about it. So I also wanted to let your viewers know that we have modules of how to discover these various elements of well-being on our Foundation for Conscious Living website. And we have a whole module on befriending fear, because the actual befriending of fear, not trying to get rid of it or override it, actually liberates the energy that's held in fear that you can use for discovery and really learning how to appreciate yourself, so that fear becomes really no big deal, but a jumping off place. It's a big leap into the unknown. And that whole script of, I'm not going to tell you this because I'm afraid it hurts you, is really treating the other person as unequal. I'm saying this because I don't think you can handle it. or I'm afraid you're going to attack me. But I think underneath that is you're not really willing to see your partner as an equal, and that they can take responsibility. And even if there's a big uproar, we've had people, have really big uproars and then moved through them, and had so much more vibrant, open energy and intimacy between them than being careful.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for sharing that resource. We'll be sure to link it in the show notes. And I'm just finding this conversation so valuable. I'm taking so many notes, but I want to respect your time. So I'll have one more question.
Okay.
If you could redesign the school system, if you could really think of what are the most important things to teach to, our youth, what are some of those things that you wish we learned when we were younger?
One is that I went to a classroom once, well, kind of in an experimental school run by a woman named Dr. Laura Phillips many years ago. And I saw first graders sitting in a circle, and they were learning how to listen to each other. And what they were doing was something I had done when I was in graduate school, learning to, the art of psychotherapy and counseling. But one kid would say something, and then the other kid would summarize it. And then everybody would discuss whether it felt
Like accurate.
and the person who said it, and so
Wow.
that's the kind of thing I think that could change the
Oh.
world, teaching emotional intelligence and how to solve a problem without making the other person wrong. That's a life skill that
Mhm.
I witnessed with my own eyes that they were teaching first and second graders there. And it was very inspiring to me that, and now I think it's more commonplace, school systems.
In some.
In many school systems, they have programs of emotional intelligence. But I think that's one thing I'd like to see. A second thing I'd like to see is I think more could be done with kinesthetic learning in schools. Like, some of us are moving learners, and some of us are ear learners, and some of us are thinking learners. And there's this whole subset of people that need to move while they learn. It doesn't mean you have to have a room full of people like a National Geographic chimp special or something like that. you,
Although you could.
you could, but it's just learning how to, like when I watch Katie teach things, she'll teach a concept and then have people check into their bodies on how they're receiving that. So the whole purpose of education is, in my opinion, should be about helping us discover what we're uniquely suited to do and how we can do that in the world. And that requires a lot of kind of going inward and making friends with the inner part of yourself.
I also would love to see, in speaking to what Gay is saying, is whole body learning. Because, when I went to school, we had to sit still and not move and try to learn something. And that kept me as a C student until my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Morgan, recognized that I was a fidgeter and moved me to the back room and said, you can move as much as you want to. And overnight, I went from being a C student to an A student, because I was able to use my whole self to learn. And so engaging all of these different modalities of discovery, and also the interrelationship, because so much of our society is individually focused, and it fosters competition and us versus them. So movement and activities that can allow us to co-create, to learn how to genuinely co-create. I think that's a necessity for our evolution if the human species is going to be successful.
Wow. Well, just so much value here. I think your work is so important, both on the relationship and the interpersonal, dynamics that you also teach on too. Really the worthiness to step into a life that you create, not based on, like you say, the roadmaps of the past or the role models of the past, but really that wonder, like you said, if I could create anything, what would I want? And interplaying that into relationships too, and that we really do have far more control. And I think it's Tony Robbins who says that anyone can go sit in a cave and meditate. Like that's the easy stuff. It's talk about spiritual growth when you're in relationship with another person. That's really the math.
Yep, that's the acid
Many
test.
a guru has learned that problem the hard way, I think.
Well, I'll be sure to link, your website, your institute, some of my favorite books. You guys have so many books to read and to go through. We'll be sure to link that in the show notes. And I just wanted to thank you so much for your valuable wisdom, your time today. I appreciate you two so much. And you're just
Aw,
such a
thank
role model
you.
and inspiration for other people.
Thank you so much. Pleasure. Thanks, Karolina.
Thank you.